What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms.
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online, you're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Richard Barrett. Now, Richard is an internationally recognised thought leader on values, cultural and leadership in business and society. He is a fellow of the World Business Academy, member of the Wisdom Council of the Centre for Integral Wisdom, an honorary board member of the Spirit of Humanity Forum, and former values coordinator at the World Bank. His books include A Guide to Liberating Your Soul, Liberating the Corporate Soul, the New Leadership Program, and many more, including his latest book, What My Soul Told Me, and the Metrics of Human Consciousness. Richard Barrett, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, Richard, one of my favourite topics, of course, is consciousness, and how does consciousness come about, and has it always been there as well? So to start off with, just let's get a bit of background about yourself. How did you, get into the work that you've done so far in terms of, looking at consciousness?
Yeah, it's a long story. I'll keep it really short. Basically, I started my life as an engineer, and I was doing that for about 22 years, and then realized that actually what I was passionate about was the evolution of human consciousness, and that's what I'd been studying all my life. And so I thought, well, how do I get out of doing what I'm doing, which was I was working at the World Bank as an engineer, and do what I would love to do. And I decided I'd just write a book called A Guide to Liberating Your Soul. And that set me on the path to writing actually 10 books now. I've got an 11th one in progress. And it just changed my whole life. And eventually I left the World Bank and started doing the work that I'm doing, and invented a way of measuring consciousness.
Okay. So, in the sense of consciousness, then, because obviously that's the topic for today. Why is measuring human consciousness important? Do you think, in your opinion?
Well, it's like anything else that you can measure. Once you can measure something, you can manage it. I mean, I don't know whether you get on the scales every day, but some people who are conscious about their weight get on the scales and they measure it, and so they're able to keep track and move in the direction they want to move. So if you can measure consciousness, it means that you can move in the direction you want to move in terms of evolving your consciousness, as long as you've got a scale to measure against. Well, the 7 levels of consciousness model provides that scale. And so we've been measuring consciousness now for over 15 years in individuals and organizations all over the world, and it works very, very well.
So just explain that then to the audience as well, and to myself. What is the model that you're using right now, and how is that measuring, in a sense, this idea of consciousness?
So I developed this model, the 7 levels model, by basically looking at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs and saying, this is a good model, but the layers of self-actualization were not very granular. And so I thought, well, I looked at Vedic philosophy and found that, in fact, you could have different levels of consciousness, soul consciousness, cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, and unity consciousness. And I slid that model together with Maslow, which was the survival, relationship, self-esteem, and I formed a 7 levels model. And then later on, at that point, I realized that at each level, survival, relationship, self-esteem, transformation, internal cohesion, making a difference in service, at each stage you operate with a different set of values. And so if I know what your values are, I can find out what levels of consciousness you're working from, either as an individual, an organization, or even a nation. And so with that idea, I developed this method for doing what we call a values evaluation or values assessment, where you ask people, what are your personal values? What values do you see in your organization? What values would you like to see? And then we plot those values against the 7 levels, and you get a visual output of who you are, how your organization operates, and how you'd like to see it operate. And you can see the differences, and in that gives you the possibility then of improving your consciousness, because you've measured it. You know what the existing culture is like, and you know what you want. And so next year, after you've done some changes, you can come back and see what's happened. Now, you can do the same thing with an individual too.
That's very interesting, and so in the sense of the value test, I suppose then it comes down to how honest people are going to be in that test as well, how honest they're going to be to themselves when doing such a test. Because some people could say one thing and yet they completely mean another because they don't want to show their real side.
Yeah. So when we're doing an assessment of an organization, we find that, okay, they may not be completely honest about their own values, but they're very honest about what they're experiencing in the organization and what they'd like to experience. So that works very well. However, if you want to do an individual or a leadership values assessment, what the leader goes online and picks 10 values that they think they operate with, and then 15 other people do the same thing for the leader. And so you get real feedback about whether in fact the leader's values or the values they think the leader is operating with are the same as what people see. And so that gives you a real honest feedback for the leader. In fact, listeners actually could go online and do their own personal values assessment, and we can give that out, that website address, anytime you like.
Sure,
so
please
that people
do.
can. Yeah, okay, so it's www.valuecenter.com/PVA, personal values assessment. And if you've got any listeners in America, that would be center, spelled CENTRE. So values plural center.com/PVA. You do the survey, it takes like 3 or 4 minutes. And then 2 minutes later, you'll get your own personal feedback about which levels of consciousness you're operating from.
Absolutely. And let's just go back here a moment as well, because obviously consciousness to myself is, just like I've said before, is a fascinating subject. And how can we sort of, how would you define consciousness to begin with as well?
Yeah, so I just sort of knew you were going to ask me that question. Yeah, I define consciousness as awareness with a purpose. So what does that mean? So let's say you're 25 years old, don't have a lot of savings, got a job, and you're beginning to get your feet on the ground, and suddenly you lose your job, okay? So now, all of a sudden, you're focused on survival. The purpose is survival. So you're operating out of survival consciousness. So awareness with the purpose. So you begin to look at your world and everything you decide through the lens of survival. That's survival consciousness. Let's say a different situation where you're a single person in your late 20s, early 30s, you're traveling the world and you have to go to a particular country for a few days, or maybe that turns out into a week and several months. And so now you're feeling pretty lonely. So you begin to look at what's happening around you through the relationship level, because you want to have friends, you want to keep in touch with people. And so you then look at life through relationship consciousness. And you can go through all the different stages, what's important to you. Now, what's interesting is the 7 levels of consciousness model is also, it represents the stages of psychological development. So we operate at a stage of development, and we grow in stages and we operate at levels. And so the survival stage is usually for the 0 to 2 year old, and then the conforming stage, which is the same as the relationship level of consciousness, is 2 to 8 years old, and then the differentiating stage is from 8 to or 9 till your late 20s. You can tell people in the differentiating stage because they really want to stand out and look different. When you get on a bus or go in the London Tube and you see young people, they've either got a little tattoo here or they've got their hair done in a particular way. They're into that differentiating. They want to be noticed, they want to be acknowledged, and they want to be respected too. And so anyhow, we move through all these different stages of psychological development. The first 3 are all about the development of the ego, and the last 3 are all about the fulfillment of the soul's purpose. And then you've got a stage in the middle where you need to align your ego motivations with your soul motivations. So we've got stages of development and we've got levels of consciousness. At any moment in time, you can be operating from the level of consciousness of the stage of development you've reached. But if something happens to you where your needs are not being fulfilled, you can move down to a lower level of consciousness.
You think that's possible, do you? That actually you can, as you've evolved consciously in a sense, you can go back down?
Well, you go back down just because of the situation that you're in. So, as I said, if you suddenly lose your job and you don't have any savings, you may have reached the individuating stage of development, which is the 4th level of consciousness. But because of the situation you find yourself in, you just drop down to the survival level. You watch every penny. You are very careful about what you spend money on. And so that can happen. Some people, never get to that fourth level of consciousness. They focus on their survival, relationship, and self-esteem needs, but then they live in a government regime which doesn't allow free thinking. So, for example, the former USSR, China right now, some other countries, the government doesn't like free thinking. It doesn't like people to grow and evolve and have an expression and an opinion, which is the fourth level of consciousness. They don't like that. And you can even get locked up and put in prison or lose your life if you want to move to that fourth stage of development. And, that's a huge challenge. And I think, I believe that within, 2 decades, we're going to see China moving into a democracy, because there will be so many people who've managed to satisfy what Maslow called their basic needs, that they are now looking to express themselves. And the only way to do that fully is in a democracy.
Absolutely, and that would be an incredible times to see that happen. It really would, and other countries who experience even lower level consciousness than that.
Yeah,
and they are out there. Well, okay, but where, in your opinion, though, does the soul come from? Is it there? Is it something that was just that just formed when we were born? This idea that we are self-expressing, or has it come from a realm that's beyond time and space?
So this is a really interesting question about which there is a lot of debate, very obviously. But I feel my soul every day. In fact, I live in soul consciousness, and it's almost like I receive instructions, and all my books are inspired by my soul. So one of the things I do sometimes in my speeches and also in my seminars, I will ask the audience to stand up if the following statement is true. So I say something at the beginning just to get them practice, like, I have a car. Everybody stands up nearly. And then I say, I am a car. Well, nobody stands up. Then I say, I have an ego. I am an ego. And most people stand up for the first and maybe not for the second. But here's the interesting thing. When I say, I have a soul, everybody stands up. And then when I say, I am a soul, everybody stays standing. It's like, I have a soul and I am a soul. So then I say to the audience, well, okay, looks like a bit of confusion here. Do you have a soul or are you a soul? And we have a debate about that. But the truth for me is that the soul has you. Who you are is the expression of a soul living in a physical body. And you think you live in this three-dimensional physical world, but actually the soul inhabits this fourth-dimensional energetic world. And that's who you really are. And the first stage of life, the first 30 years, are about getting used to being in that physical body. And that's why we develop an ego and able to get our needs met in that physical world. Then comes the stage where you begin to blend your motivations, ego motivation, with your soul motivations. Now, this doesn't always happen because you may have had lots of problems growing up when you were young. You've developed fears and fear-based beliefs, and these all block soul expression. See, the soul really incarnates into your body to do 3 things. 1, to express itself, to do what it loves to do, to give its gifts. And the second thing it incarnates to is to connect with other people. And the third thing is to contribute to the good of others. Now, here we are on the Kevin Moore Show, and I'm sure Kevin is doing what he loves to do. He's really passionate about this particular program. Where does that passion come from? Well, I believe that's the passion that comes from the soul. People like me, some people like me who start their life thinking I wanted to be a transportation engineer. And then when I get to 45, the age of self-actualization, I suddenly realized that's not what I'm passionate about. What I'm passionate about is the evolution of human consciousness. And so I build a new career based on what my soul is asking me to do.
I can fully, understand a lot of what you're saying in a sense, but from a viewpoint of actually experiencing it. You know, the idea of self-actualization, the idea of being self-aware. I always used to say to myself that I don't think I was self-aware until I got into my mid-20s. You know,
Exactly.
I look back and I think to myself, who was in my body at that time? Because it doesn't feel like it was me, the person I am now, this awareness that I am. And that does ring very true, actually. And just going back as well to what we were saying about, you know, living in countries that have a lot of restrictions. Do you think then a soul chooses to have those restrictions?
Well, you know, I can't say that I know for certain. But, you know, the common understanding of people who delve into these matters is that the soul chooses each incarnation to learn specific lessons and chooses parents and countries, etc., etc. I don't know about that. But what I do know is I do know about how the soul operates once it gets into the body, and how we form an ego, and how the ego blends with the soul, and how the soul begins to express itself. I know how all of that works, and I live it day to day. And I tell you, when you get to the point of living from soul consciousness, life gets very easy in the sense of it flows for you. If when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, it's almost as if everything's organized at a higher level of consciousness for you to flow along that path. And once if your ego gets in the way and you start to deviate from the path, you'll find blockages. Once you feel those blockages, get back to what you're supposed to be doing, it all becomes smooth again.
Right. Living from soul consciousness. Okay, so how do we know what's some of the evidence that we're living from soul consciousness, in the sense that it seems to be this space that is going with the stream. It's the space of least resistance. It's the love. It's a space of happiness, joy. What we potentially came here to do, is it?
It's more than happiness. You see, the ego, likes to get its needs met so it feels happy. That's not the soul. The soul is looking for fulfillment, and the key to fulfillment is meaning. Does your life have meaning, or is it hopeless? You know, people commit suicide when they begin to feel their life is hopeless. So, the soul. Here's an interesting thing that every creature is born with this will to survive. So where does that come from? I've searched the whole of the scientific literature. I can't find any explanation of where the will to survive comes from. And so what I've come to the conclusion is that the will to survive is simply the soul's will to be present in our three-dimensional physical reality. And when the soul's purpose for incarnating gets blocked and blocked and blocked, we feel a sense of hopelessness. We feel a sense of misery. We get sad. The ego gets angry with itself that it's not able to fulfill the soul's needs. And then we may even get depressed. That depression may lead, if things are complete, if we feel things are hopeless, may lead to wanting to commit suicide. But what's that about? It's about not being able to fulfill the soul's expression. That's what I believe it's about.
And how do we get back in tune to what our soul expression is, what our soul needs are, what our purpose for being here, being of a meaning really behind what a contribution to others, in a sense?
So, as I mentioned, the first three stages of development, psychological development, happen to us before we even know. When you said yourself a few minutes ago, I got to mid-20s and realized I'd been living unconsciously. Well, that's exactly right. So the first stage, 0 to 2, is surviving. The baby learns how to survive. Then the conforming stage, we learn to fit into our environment so we can get our needs met. And then the third stage, differentiating, is getting to the point where we feel respected and recognized in our community, so that we can become an independent human being. And so during that stage, it's really just about learning how to become viable and independent in the framework of existence that you're in. And that's basically what it's about. At this point, you begin then to feel the pull of the soul towards self-actualization, and you begin to let go of the values and beliefs of the culture that you were brought up in, so that you can align with the values you feel from the inside, the values of deeply held values. Sometimes they're called virtues, but these are values like honesty, commitment, enthusiasm, things that more fully align and attune with our soul consciousness. And that begins to happen in the 20s and early 30s. And if it doesn't happen, it's because that you're blocking it. And you're blocking it with one thing and another, and that's your fear. The fears that you learned in those first 3 decades of your life prevent you from moving forward. I don't know if you ever watch some of these cooking shows on TV, and I'm always amazed how all of these people come on, this fellow may be a carpenter, this woman may be a psychologist, this person may be something else. But then in the interview, they say, well, that's my work, but what I'm really passionate about is cooking. Okay, that's it. Go where the juice is. That's how you find your soul expression. Go where the juice is. What excites you, what interests you, go there. And that you'll find then your fulfillment if you follow that path.
Right, so it could be, digging for metal, or it could be whatever it may, whatever it may be. There's so many options. A YouTuber, making people laugh.
It's the feeling inside that says, I must do this. I've got to do this.
And when we don't do
now
this,
here comes.
Yeah.
Sorry,
no, and when we don't do this, when we don't do these things and we ignore that side of us because we say, well, I can't do that right now, now's not the right time, or, there's never, I can never give myself the space to do these things.
That's when you begin to get sad, depressed, because you're not fulfilling your soul potential. You see, during the second of our life, if we ignore the soul, we either get sad, depressed, or we become sick. Basically,
yes.
That's what happens. When you align with your soul energies, you become the picture of health. And when the more fears that you let go of, the healthier you become. This body we live in is actually designed for love. It's not designed for fear. Fear causes malfunction. Love, energetically, is what we're designed for, because actually we're energetic beings. We are that energy field, and the body is just the physical aspect of that energy field.
What happens, though, when people who have gone down a wrong path, for example, and committed some awful atrocities to others, maybe even to themselves in the way that they're destructive thinking, but let's look at, people who have done major crimes in a sense. Why have they gone down that path? Is that the soul's choice, for example, to have come down here, to allow these experiences to take place, for growth to come out of it for both parties? What's your opinion on some of this?
Yeah, people get off track mostly because of their fears that they learn in childhood. And those fears usually are about not having enough, not being loved enough, and not being enough. And a book I'm working on right now called A New Psychology of Human Well-Being, I'm actually looking at the evidence to suggest that these fears that hold us back actually begin before we're born. They energetically, if the mother, for example, doesn't really want the baby feels that, and will grow, and that will affect the belief structures that you have when you are born. Also, during the first few years of life, we also learn to fit in, to conform. And so, if we are born into a situation where our parents are drunk every night and they neglect us, we will feel that as a young person, that we will feel, that I am not loved. We learn the belief we're not loved. And these beliefs become very deeply embedded because the brain is in formation and it is laying down circuits, and the circuits it lays down are based on its experiences, and that those can stay with you. And this is really the how shall I put it, what happens when people become criminals, or when they do awful things. It's because of their terrible childhood where they were not loved, they were not acknowledged, they were not respected. You know, I don't. In one of my previous books, I called Love, Fear, and the Destiny of Nations, I actually took a look at Hitler's early life, and I mean, he had the most terrible childhood imaginable. I mean, I don't know how he even survived through that childhood, but what he did was he grew up with all of these fear-based beliefs about not having enough, not being loved enough, and not being enough. And so those needs were there with him for the rest of his life. And so he needed power to prove that he was enough, but it was so deeply embedded, he couldn't stop it.
But then do you think those scenarios that led to a life like that, which is pretty difficult to answer, I suppose, because we don't know the answers, but if such a life that leads to that, maybe those circumstances were there, injected into that experience for the path to be taken that he did?
Do you know, I'm not sure about that. I have no way of answering that question. I know what happened, and I know what happens to people who have lived through similar experiences and have led really difficult lives, but then managed to turn it around.
Oh, but there's always free will. There's always free will.
There is, but as you pointed out, you didn't have any free will up to the middle of your middle 20s. You just did. You didn't know you had free will. And when these patterns are there, when these belief structures are there, you're not operating from free will. You're operating through program. You've been programmed. You've been. You can't help operating in that way because you're trying to satisfy the needs that you didn't get satisfied when you were young, and you're still going looking to satisfy those needs. Now, the point of free will comes when you say, the pain is enough. I've had enough of this. My life is a mess. The pain is intolerable. I'm going to seek help. That's when you can turn it around.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, no matter what you might be going through, you could still create a new reality, can't you? And and learn to love yourself in the sense that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have thoughts that maybe you wouldn't class as your own, but they are there, and you could just come potentially maybe from another space if you're consciously aware enough of what you're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, the most highly evolved people sometimes have really silly and terrible thoughts. And it's like, oh, okay. What you have to do is you learn. You don't attach to the thought. That's the point. Where if you're not conscious, you attach to the thought and you play it out. Whereas when you're evolved, you see the thought, you let it float by, and you say, that was interesting, where did that come from? But you don't give it attention. Whatever thoughts we give attention to is the reality that we create. Yeah,
and like I said before, it's always difficult, isn't it, to forgive ourselves as well sometimes.
Yeah. And if you can't love yourself, there's absolutely impossible to love others. And this is the absolute truth. And that self-critical voice, that self-loathing, that self-hatred, because we've done things that we're ashamed of, we've done things that we feel guilty about. We have to get past that, because that just stops us from moving into soul consciousness. It blocks our journey, basically.
Do you think, as we evolve consciously, that we can have many purposes in a sense? It doesn't have to just be one?
It's an interesting question, that, because I think that your purpose can grow and evolve. And I look at my own life, and it was, when I was 17 and I got the opportunity to go to university, nobody in our family had ever been before. I I consciously chose a career as a transportation engineer. And I was set up. I mean, I thought, wow, this is it. I love this. And this one. And 44 years old, I suddenly found I was totally bored with my career.
Yeah.
And then I realized that it was consciousness that interested me. Now, looking back, I realized that actually the pathway I followed for those first 44 years put me in a brilliant place for the next, I don't know how many, 50, 60. My mother lived to be 100. I'm 70 myself, so whatever it is, it stood me in great stead because I was at the top of my career. I was working at the World Bank. I was traveling all over the world. And I had a deep understanding of how global economics work. And I had a deep understanding how people worked. And I'd seen people in many different cultures. That put me in a brilliant place to do the work that I'm doing now. So when I look back, I think, wow, that was good. That was well planned, Mr. Soul, I say to myself, I had a great time and it was well planned, but was it?
Well, that's it.
I don't know. I suspect it was.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Who's doing the planning then? Is that planning something that's come from
That's why I said earlier, the soul has you. You don't have a soul. The soul has you. And you get this guidance without even knowing it.
Well, that's it. And where does that guidance? If the soul doesn't reside in the body, in a sense, there's something beyond time and space where this is. It just is, and it has an I am to it, and
yes, it does.
And
so, go on. Sorry, Kevin.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So the soul is an energetic, individuated energy field from the universal energy field. So there's a universal energy field, then the soul is an individuated aspect of that. And the soul then manifests itself in physical reality. But I am my soul having Richard Barrett experience. That's what's happening to me. And you are a soul having the Kevin Moore experience, and we have Kevin Moore and Richard Barrett have free will as well. So we don't have to follow our soul. But what I found out is if you listen and you follow, your life changes amazingly.
Okay, now that I can also appreciate that as well. And what is that listening? How do we know we're listening to our soul?
Well, when you feel instability, when you feel that things aren't quite right, when you think that when you listen to your feelings, and by the way, in our society, we're not taught to listen to our feelings. We're taught to block our feelings. But our feelings are the pathway to the soul, because the feelings are the conscious reality of emotion, and emotion happens in our energy field, and the soul is in the energy field, and the ego is in the energy field, and there's an ego-soul dynamic going on all the time. And when the ego is in alignment with the soul, the energy field is in balance. As soon as the energy field gets out of balance, you feel uneasy. Your body feels uneasy. You may even get sick. And so listening to your feelings, or feeling your feelings, and moving in a direction which allows you to feel good and feel right and feel with integrity and feel that you're doing the right thing, that's the way to go. I've spent a lot of time working on myself. And as one of the questions I learned to ask myself when I don't know what to do is, I would say to myself, what's love asking you to do? And then I would choose what to do based on the answer that came to it. What's love asking you to do? Because that's the world we really live in, and all our fears simply block us from living in that world.
Yes, it's almost like when consciousness becomes aware, as it always does do at some point, that we've put a set of clothes on to become an actor on stage. And we take on the personality and all the traits that as an actors do when they act, and the real person underneath those clothes is this eternal, loving, wise beyond comparison, or has always been energy in a sense. I mean, I can't explain what the soul is; it's beyond my explanation.
Right.
But these are just words. But yeah.
Yeah, the ego is the mask that we wear to get our needs met in our physical, three-dimensional, and cultural reality. It's the mask we wear to get our needs met because we think we live in this physical world. Actually, we live in this energetic world. When we remove the mask, we actually find that our lives improve immensely and that we don't need to wear the mask.
You know, there's been a lot of stuff that's come out on the ego. You know, lots of the books have been written on it. You know, Eckhart Tolle, you know, has done a lot of work on the ego as well. And some people say the ego gets a bit of a rap in a sense. You know, it gets a hard time. But do you think we've evolved? Do you think we're evolving now beyond needing the ego in a sense?
No, actually, I'm a great fan of the ego. What screws us up is when the ego drops into fear-based beliefs. It's the fears of the ego that screw things up from us. The soul needs the ego to establish itself in our physical reality. It absolutely needs the ego to do that. And because this ego has to learn to fit in, to conform, to establish itself, so the soul can come along at a later stage and give its gifts, express itself, connect, and contribute. So the ego does all the groundwork for the soul, basically. Now, when the ego has fears, it's failing to do the groundwork. And so let's not give the ego a bad rap. Let's just say that the ego is doing the best it can to create the conditions where the soul can come in and fully express itself through you.
Yes, absolutely. And a word that keeps coming to me as well, and when we talk about fear, well, an acronym of words, is false evidence appearing real.
Absolutely, false evidence.
Yeah.
And the false evidence comes from the fact we think we're living in a three-dimensional physical reality, and most importantly, and this is really critical, we think we have needs. Now, in a physical form, yes, we do need oxygen and we do need food, etc. But I would call those not so much needs as requirements. When we don't have them, they're needs. But when we have them, they're requirements. So one of the keys of really learning to live in soul consciousness is to recognize you don't have needs. And when you recognize that, what happens is your needs are fulfilled before you even know you have them, because the soul is organizing your reality in that way. I think in the Conversations with God book series, I think it was a book 5 on that, it was a book I really enjoyed.
Neil Donald Walsh,
it dealt with this very topic of all our problems come from the fact we think we have needs. So that's why I like to make the difference between a requirement and a need. And so I practiced throughout the last 20 years of my life, reminding myself I have no need. So whatever is happening, I say, well, okay, what's the opportunity? I wanted this, my ego wanted this to happen, but it didn't. So what's the opportunity here? I can let go of that need, but what's the opportunity here for me to fulfill my soul's desires? And so quickly get over disappointments. And the disappointments are simply the ego thinking it hasn't its needs, that's all it is. And when we realize that actually that's not what's important is for the soul, for us to live a life which allows the soul to fulfill its desires, then that's more important than the ego getting its needs met.
No, that's interesting. You mentioned Neil Donald Walsh there. I mean, those books heavily influenced me back in the day, in the sense. And I've had Neil Donald Walsh come on a number of times onto the show to interview him. And a lot of this information, where does that come from? So someone like Neil Donald Walsh is having this voice in his head talk to him.
Yeah.
Now, some would call that channeling. Others would say it's almost. Inspired, not inspired. I can't remember the word.
Inspiration is a good word,
Inspiration,
Kevin.
yeah, in a sense. Let's go with that word just for now, then. But when books like this come along, and people like Edgar Casey, who channeled as well, it's almost
Yeah.
as like, the evidence is there that there is a source where we come from, that is us, wants to help us. But there is something to do. There is something in this consciousness where we come from that, and it has always been, in a sense. So when we say, is there life plans and other kinds of things in life, it's difficult to answer sometimes because we can't remember. But there has to be something greater that this consciousness that we look through our eyes has come from.
So yes, many people experience the soul as a channeled voice, okay, or channeled thought, and for me, it's more of the thought. I actually, the books I write, are requested by my soul. We've been, one of the books that you've seen of mine is What My Soul Told Me.
Yes.
It's about, so when I'm writing a book, I'm very in touch with my soul. The synchronicity rains down on me when I'm working on a book, because I'm getting all of the stimulus that I need to write the book. I'm getting my soul's inputs. I pay attention to what crosses my path. I pay attention to the fact that this person just sent me an email mentioning a particular book. I'll go out and buy that because I know now to expect that to happen. And I wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning regularly, and with insights for the chapter that I'm working on.
Wow.
And so, I'm just really a vehicle for my soul, and I become the aspect that was me, this so-called sort of ego me, becomes less and less, and I become more and more my soul. I know I'm dropping back into ego when I get a little upset or angry or fearful. I've dropped back into ego, so then I can say, okay, I have no needs, just let it go. You don't need that to happen. Just let it go. Everything's perfect. You just have to go with what is happening right now. That isn't to say that you're a pushover. No, you can be very persevering and following your soul's path. But you feel that. You feel when you need to be persevering. You feel that coming through you.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. And you mentioned, well, I mentioned, sorry, about Edgar Casey just there when we mentioned a few names. Now, fascinating information was brought through Casey, as many other channels were. And one thing he talked about as well is being of service. Do you think that when you're looking for a purpose, it's an automatic thing to be of service, or that needs to be sort of balanced out with when trying to be true to yourself and find your purpose?
Okay, so this happens in stages. So the fifth stage of psychological development is self-actualization, where you begin to find out what it is, your true self, the sense of who you really are and what you're passionate about. Then the next stage is integrating, where you integrate that true self into your life and you start to make a difference in your world by collaborating with other people, by connecting with other people. And that usually happens in our 50s. And when we get to our 60s, we enter fully into the serving stage. Now, you may have felt the expression of the serving earlier on, but let me tell you, when you get to the 60s, it's like overwhelming that what you really want to do is just be of service and give back. And I find it very interesting in this new book I'm working on, and looking at what happens to people when they get to 60 years old and more. And, most people retire from their job, so they move out of the sphere where they actually had meaning and purpose and they could make a difference. And if they can't replace that, then their lives close down and their health closes down too. And if you look at the people who are really healthy in their 80s and 90s, these are people who are still passionate about their purpose. They're very creative. They are being of service to the world. Because why? Because they feel their soul impulse still. Their soul is still fulfilling its purpose. But when you close that down, well, you just descend into old age. When you leave it open, the old age can be a very, very rewarding experience.
Yes, and I see that in my father a bit nowadays, where he is wanting to be more of service. I think he always has been, but as he's entered into his 70s, it was quite obvious to me when I saw him this weekend. So I can completely agree with that as well. This is much more of an interesting interview than I thought it was going to be. So sometimes you do a lot of interviews and you don't quite know which way they're going to go. But this is fascinating. What your work, it really is.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
That's very nice of you to say that.
Well, no, it is. If it's a very important to look at these subjects. I mean, sometimes we get so addicted, don't we, to I am my car, my fast, sportsy car. I am my job title. I am. We class ourselves, don't we, by all these external things. Yet you take that away from people like that, then who are they really? I don't think they've ever asked themselves that questions, or they would say it's too woo-woo to look at alternative subjects like that, to go any deeper than to say that science has all the answers only.
I would say they say that, but actually they're frightened. They're scared. It's fear that's blocking them. Yeah. And the woo-woo is just like a projection of I've had this impression of what those people are like. I don't want to be seen to be like that. But it's not really about being woo-woo. It's actually about being real. It's about taking the mask off and becoming truly who you are. And that's what they're not doing. They're not doing that. They're afraid to do that. And there could be many reasons why they're afraid not to do that.
Yes, absolutely, and I think I had a psychiatrist on the other day as well. An interesting interview on all sorts of different subjects connected with consciousness as well, believe it or not. But as they said to me, science does not have all the answers at all when it comes to the brain, when it comes to our psyche, in a sense of where this idea of consciousness comes from. It cannot answer these questions.
No, it can't. And so here's an interesting anecdote, Kevin. About 3 months ago now, I was giving an opening keynote speech at the ESADE Business School in Barcelona. It's one of the top business schools. And it was rather adventurous, the conference, because it was about spirituality, creativity, and management. And during the opening session, 300 people, many from universities, I did that experience. Stand up if this is real for you. I have a car, I am a car. I have a soul, I am a soul. Now, interestingly, 98% of the audience stood up when I said I have a soul, and they stayed standing when I said I am a soul. Now, immediately after me speaking were two neuroscientists. And the first slide they showed said, here are our basic assumptions. There is no such thing as a soul. And I just had the whole audience standing up because they said they had a soul. I mean, I was like, totally, if I could use this North Country expression, I was totally gobsmacked. I mean, the audience all felt they had a soul, and here were the neuroscientists say, well, now you read almost all of the psychological literature, and the soul is an absolute no-no. Even in some of the transpersonal people that we know, some quite famous people, you read their books and you look in the index for soul and it's not there. So for me, and of course, I'm just biased because this is my reality, and I see it, and I think it explains nearly everything in life, and it brings answers which science can't answer. You know, the question I had at the beginning, you know, where does the will to survive come from? There is no scientific explanation for that. It's the soul's will to be present in our three-dimensional physical reality. It's as simple as that. So I think science has a long way to go yet. And there are many critics of science, but I think what's happening is the concept of the quantum reality is leading people into this four-dimensional understanding, energetic understanding. And
Yes.
and Einstein is very famous for saying, you know, that I could put it in the quote in my books. I can't remember it exactly, but you know, he totally understood that we live in a fourth-dimensional energetic reality, and that's the world we live in. And so, yeah, I think science has quite a ways to come yet to catch up with what people are actually thinking, and find explanations for realities which they do not have right now.
Yes, absolutely. And with your work as well, I think, you know, when you look at the stages of evolution, as you've done in a sense of the soul evolution, you can in the end start to concentrate on creating a life that you want as well. So if you know, you can create a reality and be in charge of it rather than the opposite way around. You know, some people would feel that it's out of their control to have the life experience or reality that they want, but actually you create your own reality in a sense.
You do, and you can create the reality based on the fears of your ego and get sad and depressed, or you can create the reality based on the desires of your soul, full of love and connection and creativity, and feel pretty marvelous about your life. That isn't to say you're not going to have ups and downs, of course, but you know, when you have a hell of a lot more ups than downs, well, things are going well.
Absolutely, they are, absolutely, and you can, and we are all entitled to that life as well. We all have a right for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've been reading recently the work of Dr. Janov, who wrote the book Primal Scream, and he takes people back from their thoughts into their feelings, into their the deep source of the problems that took them to where they are right now, and many of those problems, those acute problems, happened when during the period of gestation and during the first 2 or 3 years of life. And there's ample evidence now that says basically to lead what happens in early childhood and in utero affects you for the rest of your life.
Yes, and that's where your work is going in the sense of your new book as well, which will be fascinating.
Exactly, that's exactly where my work is going now. Yeah.
But which will be fascinating to get you back on for that as well. But as you mentioned before, you know, when you looked at your life as well, I've heavily, you know, gone back over certain steps that you took to get where you've got. You know, you would say that having the job that you did for so long led you to where you were. It was almost as though it was meant to be. And I'll go back to what I said before. When you talk about early childhood issues and situations that occur that make the life experience go the way it's going to go, in a sense, or the way it's gone, is there any predetermined there in a sense that from forces outside natural occurrence, in a sense?
We're all living the soul journey, and we all attempting to move through these 7 stages of development, and you know, some people do better than others, and but you know, we just have to have compassion for one another where we are, and you know, if you're fortunate enough to be able to make it through those stages, then become a coach and become a mentor, help people who are having difficulty to move through these stages, so that they can reach their fulfillment. Because ultimately, and this is a weird expression, but from an energetic perspective, there's only one of us on the planet. We're all individuated aspects of that same one energy field. And so when I give to you, when I get to that level of consciousness of serving, when I give to you, I'm giving to myself. And that is pretty amazing.
It is, and just, for the audience, just remember that giving can be anything. It could be, making someone laugh through entertainment. It could be the hairdresser. Most jobs are, and I always use that word, it could be the hairdresser, but most jobs seem to be of service, don't they? It always seems to be of giving back. But I think what you're also saying, Richard, is that when you come from that space of giving back, when that's your prime focus in a sense, everything else that you want from that experience, maybe it be the wealth or whatever you're looking for from that experience, that becomes secondary to you, but it also, you manifest that as well. That actually becomes the reality of the situation as well.
That is true. You get all your needs met. It's again, and that is pretty amazing too, I found.
It is. And Richard, my final question to yourself is, what would you say is the most important messages from your book so far?
Well, I've written about many different topics, from leadership to organizational culture, building a values-driven organization, what my soul told me, practical guide to soul activation, love, fear, and the destiny of nations. I've written about many topics, but the one fundamental that is in all of those is the stages of development and the levels of consciousness. And I think the fundamental thought I think I would give to people is everyone's on a journey. Figure out where you are on that journey, what stage of development you've got to. And it's pretty easy to figure it out, and because it's very heavily related to age. And then work on mastering that stage of development, knowing that there'll be another stage following, and you'll need to master that one too. And you'll find in What My Soul Told Me and several of other my books, you'll find these stages well outlined, and you can find out where you are, what you've got to do to move to the next level, and realize that life is a journey.
Well, Richard Barrett, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, Kevin. Thanks a lot for having me.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on The More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.